This video is of recent highlights of Caniron 9 in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. This is Christophe Derringer, and he's working with his hydraulic press on what was a 1-inch ball bearing. He makes a small knife out of it, a little stiletto. This is Jean. I didn't catch his last name, and he's doing a pour of a bronze anvil, and his demonstration was talking about setting up the investment compound and packing it. It's a sand casting, and then he heated the crucible in the coal forge, and you just saw the pour there. Cleaning out the crucible. This is J.D. Smith. He was talking about Damascus steel. He was welding with kerosene as a flux, and he talked a fair bit about that and pattern development. He also used the small gas forge and the press for drawing out and the initial weld. The billet when he started was approximately 1.5 inches by 2 inches by about 6 inches long, and had 15 layers in it. And the layers were, if I remember correctly, 15N20 and 1084. So here he's showing the crowd how the weld did take. He welded at a very low temperature, just slightly above what you see in the video right now. And he wanted to show that it did take and that the kerosene worked fine as a flux. It actually works to absorb the oxygen present, so there is no scale buildup. JD's doing a further drawing, a little bit of edge work on the boat here. Using an hydraulic press. It's a 30-ton hydraulic press, and it was running off a small generator. Now, interesting thing was it only had a 2-horsepower motor, and it seemed to function fine. Nice little tool. The tool is actually Christophe's. He brought it in for the demonstration. There you got a closer view. He's actually working with somewhat flat dies in the draw out, and he's just pinching it a little bit, about 1/4 inch at a time. He's not really trying to move the steel a tremendous distance. Christophe helping him tighten some nuts there, I think, just to keep it from sliding around. The dies are interchangeable and they can slide around. This is Lee Sauter. He was doing a smelt. So at the right hand side is the smelt furnace that he built. He built that on Saturday, and then he did the smelt on Sunday. The smelt takes basically 6 to 7 hours to run. And at this point, this is right at the end, he's cleaning it out, and he's taking the bloom out of the bottom extraction from the smelter. This is quite a long video clip, so you'll get to see the whole process. He's built up a layer of ash on the bottom, ash and charcoal fines, and then the bloom forms on top of that. This allows him to clean out the ash, kind of knock the bloom loose, which you'll see in a few minutes, and then be able to extract it through the bottom. The other way of doing this is an extraction through the top, and of course there is some risk of damaging the smelter with doing that. His smelter was approximately 36-40 inches high, and it was built on a base of sand. I would suggest looking up Lee Sauter for detailed information on smelting. Also, I would suggest taking a look at Daryl Markowitz's site, which is thewaringforge.ca, because he has quite extensive information on smelting. Daryl was also demonstrating at Caniron, and I have a still photo of him working with the small remelting furnace called the Aristotle Furnace. So Lee's just pulling it out here with the tongs. He got quite a good mass, and it was surrounded by slag, which he chips off in a minute. Yeah, you can see him working at it. When the bloom comes out of the smelter, it's a fairly spongy mass, and the first steps are knocking the slag off and then refining the bloom, just consolidating it a little bit so the mass is a little bit more integral. And then, much like Damascus, you start re-welding and re-welding a section of it to create a more and more solid bar of steel or iron. So he swings over, pulls it onto a stump. So you want to use a stump for the initial compaction, so you don't fragment it and have it flying all over the place.
As soon as you get to the metal, right? Yeah, you will.
And the lady helping him is Sandra Dunn, and she's really just sort of tapping the outer surface, trying to slowly condense the bloom into something a little bit more solid, a little bit more easy to handle. A little bit heavier blows. Of course, the bloom is cooling all this while, but it's quite a large mass, so they do have a fair amount of working time they can get with it. You see they soon switch around. I'm going to use an axe. And the axe is essentially a hot cut. And I think at this point he's actually just sectioning off some of the outer side. A little bit later on they actually split the bloom in half. Now the axe is kept in a bucket of water. You'll see he'll soak it down a number of times as it gets hot. And literally it's just driven through the hot mass of iron. We probably had 60 to 80 people at Caniron 9. It was well put on. It was an interesting site. It was at Les Forges de Saint-Maurice, just north of Trois-Rivières, which was the original foundry in Canada. And it dates back to, I think I read 1630 when they first discovered the site. And I think went into production 1700s. And it supplied cast iron and then pig iron throughout Quebec and Canada. You can see the axe head's loosening up a little bit. I have to hammer it back on. You can see in the shadow there's still quite a glow from the bloom, so that core is still quite hot. And in the sunlight, it looks like it was up around 1600 degrees. So a slow process. And a little bit of a better view. The axe sinks right the way through. They're pretty well cut through from one side. In a moment, you'll see a third person join in for the hammering. That's the third person. Oh, sorry, still two. Lee changes with Sandra, I guess, and he starts striking in a few minutes. It's fascinating to watch. Once he gets it sectioned in half, he leaves one half of the bloom just raw, and that was auctioned off on the Sunday night. and this is where they switch. And the other half he puts back into the furnace, and he shifts his air around a little bit and changes the furnace into a ground level forge, and he heats the bar up, and then he has a team of 3 strikers working on the bar until they refine it into basically I guess it was a 2x2 by about 8-inch block of wrought iron. Yeah, they're working away at it. And these people haven't worked together, so they have to develop a system of communication, a system of efficient working. It's very rare that we get to work with strikers, since most of us are one-man shops. So they've gotten into a rhythm with taking a number of hammer blows, quite heavy hammer blows, driving that axe through, and then hammering on the bloom itself so Sandra can unlock the axe and cool it down. There's the third fellow. They had quite a rhythm. I was quite impressed. It's a lot of work to get just a chunk of iron to then do something with. We often forget that in the old days this was really labor intensive. We still have to spend a lot in labor on our activities, but this really changes the perspective. All the metal was hard won back in our history. Soon we finish up splitting through. Just about there. And we finally get it separated. And then the one piece goes back into the furnace for further compaction and refining. This is Daniel Gouffet, and he's a coppersmith from Quebec. He was working on rooster weather vanes, and I only have some still photos coming up. Very nice work. You can see some of his tools there. Very light, very easy to work with, but very dramatic pieces. This is a still photo of Daryl Markowitz, and he's working with the small remelting furnace, which they call the Aristotle Furnace. And basically a tabletop version. You can see one in the foreground of the photo there, and made out of clay, approximate interior diameter of about 4 or 5 inches, and then charcoal added. And then he uses this to take essentially mild steel bar and remelt it, and he can adjust the carbon content, typically adding about 0.5% carbon to it. And it also provides a structure very similar to a bloom that's been worked. Lloyd Johnson was working on a gun barrel for a black powder rifle. And this is the initial stage where he's upsetting the edge of the bar on both edges. Very long process, but quite interesting as well. And the next clip shows some of the pieces in mid-stage. So you can see where he folds it over, and then it's essentially forge welded in segments all the way along. There at the right hand side you can see the fold, and then in the middle on the table you can see how it's rippled over and the two edges come together and are forge welded. At the left hand side are the mandrels that are used to keep the opening all the way through. Tom Latain was doing some locksmithing, and you can see on his bench in front of him he had some various keys and lots of smaller tools, typically files and jigs for making the keys. Very, very fine work, and unfortunately I didn't get a photograph of the locks that he was working on. But Caniron was a great event, and if you missed it, you really missed out on some good information. Just a quick thank you to the organizers of this year's Caniron 9 in 2013. It really was a worthwhile event, even though there wasn't many people that attended. I certainly enjoyed myself, and I had no trouble with language issues or anything like that. The Quebec fellows really went out of their way to make us feel welcome. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this, and for more information, please see artistblacksmith.com.